Bullies try to shove a pencil case into a new student's mouth, humiliated him in public and beat him up, but they had no idea what he would do the next day. Aiden Nakamura slouched in his seat at the back of Mrs. Peterson's English class, trying to make himself as small as possible. At 15, he was used to being invisible, or at least he tried to be. His slight build and soft features made him an easy target, especially as the new kid at Westfield High. He'd arrived only 3 weeks ago when his father's job transferred them across the country, and he'd quickly learned that being the new, Asian kid who was shorter and skinnier than most of the boys in his grade wasn't doing him any favors. What his classmates didn't know, what nobody at Westfield knew, was that behind Aiden's quiet demeanor and oversized hoodies lay 5 years of intensive mixed martial arts training. Back home, he'd been the junior state champion in his weight class 2 years running. His grandfather, a former professional fighter in Japan, had started training him when he was 10, and Aiden had taken to it with natural talent and fierce dedication. But here, in this new school where nobody knew him, Aiden had made a conscious decision to keep that part of himself hidden. New school, new start. His parents had encouraged him to focus on academics this time around, worried that his previous training had consumed too much of his time, so his trophies and medals stayed, packed away in boxes, and his daily training regimen had been reduced to private sessions in their garage when his homework was done. "Hey, look, it's Jackie Chan Jr., a voice whispered from 2 desks over, followed by muffled laughter. Aiden didn't need to look up to know it was Brandon Wells, the self-appointed king of the sophomore class. Brandon was everything Aiden wasn't at Westfield, popular, athletic, and confident to the point of arrogance. With his perfectly styled blonde hair and Letterman jacket, he looked like he'd stepped out of a teen movie about high school hierarchy. Brandon rarely operated alone. His 2 sidekicks, Trent Maddox and Devin Carter, were always close by, ready to laugh at his jokes and back him up when needed. Trent was almost as tall as Brandon, but burlier, with the build of the football lineman he was. Devin was smaller, but had a mean streak that made up for it, always the first to escalate from verbal taunts to physical intimidation. Mrs. Peterson was writing something on the whiteboard, her back turned to the class. A crumpled paper ball hit Aiden on the side of his head. He didn't react, keeping his eyes fixed on his notebook. Just ignore them. Don't give them what they want. What's the matter, Kung Fu boy? Cat got your tongue? Brandon's voice was low enough not to attract the teacher's attention, but loud enough for those sitting nearby to hear. A few students glanced over, some looking uncomfortable, others mildly amused, but nobody said anything. Aiden had learned that responding only made things worse. He'd tried standing up for himself verbally during his first week, but that had just painted a bigger target on his back. So he'd settled for the strategy of being as uninteresting as possible, hoping they'd eventually get bored and move on to someone else. The bell rang, signaling the end of class. Aiden gathered his books quickly, hoping to slip out before Brandon. And his friends could corner him, but he wasn't fast enough. "Where are you running off to, Karate Kid?" Brandon stepped directly into his path as he tried to exit the classroom. "We were just starting to have fun." "Excuse me," Aiden said quietly, trying to step around him. Trent moved to block his path. "You hear something, Brandon? Sounds like a little mouse squeaking." "Please move," Aiden said, a bit louder this time, clutching his books tighter to his chest. "Or what?" Brandon leaned in closer, towering over Aiden by at least 6 inches. "You gonna use some of those ninja moves on us?" "Stay calm, walk away, don't engage." "I just want to get to my next class," Aiden said, keeping his voice even despite the anger bubbling inside him. Mrs. Peterson had already left the room, heading to the teacher's lounge for her free period. The few remaining students hurried out, pretending not to notice what was happening. Nobody wanted to get involved. "I think Jackie Chan here needs to learn some manners," Brandon said, looking to his friends for approval. "Doesn't he, guys?" Without warning, Devin knocked the books out of Aiden's hands, sending them scattering across the floor. Aiden instinctively dropped to his knees to gather them, which was exactly what they were hoping for. Brandon placed his foot on top of Aiden's chemistry textbook just as he reached for it. "Say please," Brandon taunted. Aiden looked up, meeting Brandon's eyes for the first time. For a brief moment, something flickered across his face, a flash of something that didn't belong to the meek new kid persona he'd been projecting, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Please," he said flatly. Brandon removed his foot with a smirk. "See, that wasn't so hard, was it?" Aiden collected his books and stood up, his jaw clenched tight. As he moved toward the door, Trent stuck out his foot, sending Aiden stumbling forward. He caught himself before falling, years of training giving him better balance than they expected. "Oops," Trent said innocently. "You should watch where you're going." The three of them laughed as Aiden finally made it out the door, their voices echoing in the hallway behind him. Breathe. Just breathe. The rest of the day followed a similar pattern. In the cafeteria, Brandon accidentally bumped into Aiden's tray, sending his lunch crashing to the floor. During gym class, he became the last person picked for teams, followed by exaggerated groans from whoever ended up with him, despite the fact that his reflexes and coordination were far better than anyone realized. By the final bell, Aiden was mentally exhausted from constantly being on guard. As he made his way to his locker, he allowed himself to hope that maybe he could get out without another incident. But as he approached his locker, he saw Brandon, Trent, and Devin waiting nearby, their postures casual, but their intentions clear. Hayden considered turning around and leaving his books behind, but he needed them for homework. Taking a deep breath, he walked to his locker and started turning the combination lock. "Well, if it isn't our favorite new friend," Brandon said, sliding over to lean against the locker next to Aiden's. "We were just talking about you." Aiden said nothing, focusing on opening his locker and exchanging his books as quickly as possible. "You know, you've been here 3 weeks now and we still don't know anything about you," Brandon continued. "That's not very friendly." "Not much to know," Aiden muttered, shoving books into his backpack. "See, I don't believe that," Brandon said, his voice dropping to a more menacing tone. "I think you're hiding something. Nobody's as boring as you pretend to be." Aiden zipped up his backpack and closed his locker. "I need to catch my bus." As he turned to leave, Trent stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "The bus can wait. We're having a conversation here." The hallway was emptying quickly as students rushed to catch their rides home. A few stragglers glanced their way but kept moving. Aiden noticed a teacher at the far end of the hall, but she turned down another corridor without looking in their direction. "What do you want?" Aiden asked, his patience wearing thin. "Just a little initiation," Brandon said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Everyone new to Westfield has to go through it. Right, guys?" Trent and Devin nodded, moving to form a loose circle around Aiden, backing him against the lockers. "I'm not interested," Aiden said, his voice firmer than it had been all day. "That's not how it works," Brandon said, stepping closer. "You don't get to choose." Without warning, Devin grabbed Aiden's backpack from behind and yanked it off his shoulders. Before Aiden could react, Trent had grabbed his arms, twisting them behind his back. "Let me go," Aiden said, the edge in his voice becoming more pronounced. Brandon unzipped Aiden's backpack and dumped its contents on the floor. Books, notebooks, and pencils scattered across the linoleum tiles. He crouched down and picked up Aiden's pencil case, a plain black zippered pouch that contained his pens, pencils, and other supplies. "What's this? Your little man purse?" Brandon mocked, holding it up. Aiden struggled against Trent's grip, but the larger boy tightened his hold. Years of training had taught Aiden exactly how to break free, how to use Trent's size and weight against him, but he held back. He'd promised his parents no fighting, not after what had happened at his last school, when he'd put a bully in the hospital with a broken arm and nearly been expelled. "Just give it back," Aiden said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I don't think so," Brandon said, unzipping the pencil case and examining its contents. "I've got a better idea." He pulled out a handful of pens and pencils, dropping them on the floor. Then he held up the empty pencil case, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "I think you should eat this," Brandon said, stepping closer to Aiden. Aiden's eyes widened. "What? You heard me." "Open wide, Jackie Chan." Trent tightened his grip on Aiden's arms while Devin moved to grab his hair, yanking his head back. Brandon stepped forward with the open pencil case, trying to force it toward Aiden's mouth. "Stop," Aiden said, his voice deadly calm despite the situation. "You don't want to do this," Brandon laughed. "Oh, I think I do. Now open up like a good boy." As Brandon tried to force the pencil case against his lips, something inside Aiden snapped. The weeks of restraint, of playing the submissive new kid, evaporated in an instant. A switch flipped in his mind, muscle memory from countless training sessions taking over. In one fluid motion, Aiden stomped hard on Trent's instep, causing his grip to loosen momentarily. That split second was all Aiden needed. He twisted his right arm free and drove his elbow back into Trent's solar plexus with precisely controlled force, enough to wind him but not enough to cause serious damage. As Trent doubled over, gasping for breath, Aiden spun out of Devin's grip, breaking the hold on his hair with a sharp, practiced movement. Before either Brandon or Devin could process what was happening, Aiden had created distance between himself and his attackers, dropping into a fighting stance that made it clear he was no ordinary target. The change in Aiden was dramatic and immediate, his posture straightened, shoulders squaring with confidence. The timid, slouching new kid was gone, replaced by someone who moved with purpose and precision. His eyes, usually downcast, now burned with focused intensity. "What the—" Brandon started, still holding the pencil case, his expression shifting from cruel amusement to confusion. "I said stop," Aiden repeated, his voice carrying a quiet authority that hadn't been there before. "Walk away now, all of you." Devin, recovering from his surprise, lunged at Aiden with a wild swing. With minimal movement, Aiden sidestepped the punch, caught Devin's extended arm, and used the boy's own momentum to send him crashing into the lockers with a loud metallic bang. Brandon's eyes widened in shock, but anger quickly replaced his surprise. He dropped the pencil case and charged forward, fists raised. Aiden met the attack with calculated precision, blocking Brandon's first swing and countering with a palm strike to the chest that sent the larger boy stumbling backward. "I don't want to fight you," Aiden said calmly, "but I will defend myself." By now the commotion had drawn attention. Students who had been heading to the exits stopped to watch, forming a growing semicircle around the confrontation. Whispers spread quickly. "The new kid is fighting Brandon. Did you see that move? Who is this guy?" Trent, recovering his breath, rejoined the fray, attempting to grab Aiden from behind. Without looking, Aiden sensed the approach, ducked under Trent's extended arms, and swept his legs out from under him with a perfectly executed kick. Trent hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of him for the second time. Brandon, seeing his friends so easily dispatched, hesitated, but pride and an audience prevented him from backing down. He charged again, throwing a flurry of punches that Aiden blocked or dodged with an almost casual ease. It was like watching someone swat away flies. After letting Brandon tire himself out, Aiden finally countered, his movements so fast they seemed to blur. Her quick strike to Brandon's shoulder, targeting a pressure point rather than causing any real damage, followed by a leg sweep that sent the bully crashing to the floor beside his friends. The hallway fell silent, except for the heavy breathing of the three bullies. Aiden stood over them, not even winded, his stance relaxed but ready if they chose to continue. "We're done here," he said quietly. The sound of rapid footsteps broke the silence as Mr. Reeves, the vice principal, pushed through the crowd of onlookers. "What is going on here?" he demanded, taking in the scene. Three of the school's well-known athletes on the floor, surrounded by scattered school supplies, and the new kid standing calmly in the middle of it all. Before anyone could answer, a voice spoke up from the crowd. "They attacked him, Mr. Reeves." It was Sophia Martinez, a quiet girl from Aiden's English class who had never spoken to him before. Brandon and his friends cornered him and tried to force something into his mouth. He was just defending himself. Several other students nodded in agreement, emboldened by Sophia's courage. "They've been bullying him all day," added another voice. "All week," corrected someone else. Mr. Reeves looked from the fallen bullies to Aiden, his expression a mix of confusion and concern. "Is this true, Mr. Nakamura?" Aiden nodded, the adrenaline fading as he became aware of the audience around him. "They took my pencil case and tried to make me eat it. I just wanted them to stop." Brandon started to protest, but Mr. Reeves silenced him with a raised hand. "All of you, to my office. Now." He looked at Aiden. "You too, Mr. Nakamura." As they made their way to the administration offices, the whispers followed them. By tomorrow, everyone at Westfield would know what had happened. The story of how the quiet new kid had taken down three of the school's biggest bullies would spread like wildfire. In Mr. Reeves' office, the truth came out quickly. Too many witnesses had seen the bullying for Brandon and his friends to deny it effectively, and when the vice principal asked Aiden about his fighting skills, he reluctantly explained his background in mixed martial arts. "I didn't want trouble," Aiden said quietly. "That's why I didn't tell anyone about my training. At my old school, people always wanted me to prove myself or fight. I just wanted to be normal here." Mr. Reeves nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that, Aiden, but hiding who you are isn't the answer either." He turned to Brandon, Trent, and Devin. "You three have a week's suspension to think about your choices. And when you return, you'll be attending the school's anti-bullying program." To Aiden, he added, "While I understand you were defending yourself, fighting on school grounds can't go unpunished. You'll have detention for the rest of the week, as Dao." They left the office. Brandon shot Aiden a venomous look but said nothing. His friends followed suit, their earlier confidence shattered by the public defeat. The next day at school, everything was different for Aiden. As he walked through the hallways, students who had never noticed him before now watched with curious eyes. Some nodded in recognition, others whispered behind their hands, but the fear and intimidation he'd felt before were gone. During lunch, as Aiden sat alone at his usual table, a tray clattered down across from him. He looked up to see Sophia Martinez sliding into the seat. "Mind if I join you?" she asked with a small smile. Before he could answer, 2 more students approached, both of whom he recognized from classes but had never spoken to. "This seat taken?" asked one, a tall boy named Marcus, who shared Aiden's math class. Soon, Aiden found himself surrounded by people genuinely interested in getting to know him. The questions came rapidly. Where had he learned to fight? How long had he been training? Would he consider teaching them some moves? "I'm not supposed to fight," Aiden explained, feeling strangely comfortable with the attention now that it wasn't. "Negative. My parents made me promise after what happened at my last school, but that was self-defense," Sophia pointed out. Even Mr. Reeves could see that. As the week progressed, Aiden's social circle expanded. He was no longer the invisible, new kid, but someone people wanted to know. The fighting skills that he'd tried to hide became something that earned him respect rather than fear. A week after the incident, Aiden was at his locker when he sensed someone behind him. Turning, he found himself face to face with Brandon Wells, back from suspension. The hallway immediately tensed, students slowing down to watch what might happen. Brandon looked different. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by an uncomfortable stiffness. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I was out of line," Brandon finally said, the words clearly difficult for him. "What we did, what I did, it wasn't cool." Aiden studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. "No, it wasn't. I'm not going to pretend we're going to be friends," Brandon continued, "but I'm done messing with you. We're clear on that." It wasn't quite an apology, but Aiden recognized it for what it was, the closest thing to one that someone like Brandon could manage without completely losing face. "We're clear," Aiden agreed with a nod. Brandon gave a curt nod in return and walked away, his shoulders not quite as high as they used to be. Later that day, during gym class, Coach Brennan approached Aiden as students were warming up. "Nakamura," he said, clipboard in hand, "I hear you've got some fighting skills." Aiden tensed, expecting trouble. "Yes, sir. The wrestling team could use someone with your training. Ever considered joining?" The offer surprised Aiden. I'll have to talk to my parents about it." Coach Brennan nodded. "Do that, and tell them that discipline and technique are what we value most, not aggression." That evening, Aiden had a long conversation with his parents. He explained what had happened, not just the fight, but how hiding who he was had made him an easier target, how pretending to be someone else hadn't protected him. It had only made him vulnerable in different ways. "I miss training," he admitted. "Not the fighting part, but the discipline, the focus. It's part of who I am." His father looked troubled. "We just don't want a repeat of what happened before." "It won't be," Aiden promised. "I know better now. I know when to walk away and when I can't. The school has a wrestling team. Coach says they could use someone with my background." His mother and father exchanged looks, having one of those silent conversations that parents seemed capable of. "We'll consider it," his mother finally said. "But academics still come first." The next day, Aiden walked into Westfield High with his head held high, no longer trying to make himself invisible. He wore his favorite G-jacket over his t-shirt, not as a threat but as a statement. "This is who I am." In the weeks that followed, Aiden joined both the wrestling team and, with Coach Brennan's encouragement, started a small after-school club teaching basic self-defense. Sophia was one of the first to sign up, along with several other students who had been victims of bullying in the past. "It's not about fighting back," Aiden explained during their first session. "It's about confidence. When you know you can defend yourself if you have to, you carry yourself differently. Sometimes that's enough to keep trouble away." The irony wasn't lost on him. He had tried so hard to hide this part of himself, only to find that embracing it was what finally allowed him to fit in, not as the scary fighter kid, but as someone who had found strength in being true to himself and was willing to share that strength with others. As for Brandon and his friends, they kept their distance. The bullying didn't stop entirely at Westfield. No single incident could change the entire culture of a school overnight, but there was a noticeable shift. Other students were more willing to speak up when they saw someone being mistreated, knowing they wouldn't stand alone. 3 months after arriving at Westfield as the invisible new kid, Aiden stood in the school gym, coaching a group of students through a basic defensive stance. Looking around at the faces focused on his instruction, some former victims, some former bystanders, even Trent was there. Having joined after a quiet, awkward conversation with Aiden, he felt a sense of belonging he hadn't expected to find. "Remember," he told them, "the strongest person isn't the one who never falls. It's the one who has the courage to get back up and face whatever knocked them down." The words were as much for himself as for them. Every day wasn't perfect. There were still moments when he felt like an outsider, still days when he questioned his place. But he no longer tried to be invisible. He had found his voice not by becoming someone new, but by having the courage to be himself, all of himself, even when it was easier to hide. In the end, that was the real victory. Not the day he stood up to the bullies, but every day since when he stood up as his authentic self.